Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Dan. Dan, for everyone out there listening, please tell them about yourself.
Well, I'm 6'1" on a good day. I won't talk about how much I weigh these days. It's ugly. The pandemic was not good for me. I'm a tech journalist and a tech, also kind of a marketing writer these days. And I've been doing this for about 300 years. Started actually in the 80s when I was covering dot matrix printers. Raise your hands if you know what a dot matrix printer is. And since then, I've been freelancing for, more than 100 publications all told. Some of them you've heard of. I wrote for The Guardian. I wrote for 20 years for Family Circle magazine, which is now no longer here with us. A lot of the computer magazines, I've pretty much been around forever. And I've written about just about every topic in technology at one point or another.
What are your thoughts on tech? I know personally from just reading a lot of your articles as well, too, but just so the audience also kind of is aware of where your stance would be on tech. Are you happy with where it's going? Are you scared? Because I've been back and forth. I think before I was really against the Neuralink. And then after knowing so much more about tech and how much they track you, I'm pretty sure the social dilemma woke a lot of people up as well, too. I realized it has more potential to it. Now I'm not as scared as I was before because I think we're heading towards that digital age. I just get more nervous when it comes to the children growing up. They're being surrounded by it. I would call them digitally native, which is kind of like they're just going to know how to work it better than anything. But it's crazy where it's going. You really can't predict, like, is it in the best direction? I know censorship's an issue, especially if they're a content creator. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've always sort of been on the side of looking at, the positive and the negative, kind of trying to balance it out. And I've always been writing about how technology impacts human beings. There are a lot of people who just write about tech because they love the gadgets, and they're deep into the specs. And I'm more about, well, what does this mean for people? And so, it is a very mixed bag, and it can be very scary in terms of, basically where we are now, right? Look at the world right now. Look at the information war that we are engaged in at the moment in the world, and look at the last 5 years and how it's impacted everything. And how much of this is going to be algorithmically driven. How many decisions in your life are going to be driven by code that you're unaware of, and especially by code that has been created by a deep learning machine learning algorithm that its own creators don't really understand, right? So that's one of the key things I think about is, how much is AI going to drive our lives? And there's certainly positive and negative aspects to both of that. It's nice to know, hey, if I like this on Netflix, you might like that, right? At the same time, though, if I apply for a loan online and I get an instant answer these days, and I'm, not approved, I have no idea why. And so, the need for what's called explainable AI and the need for more transparency in how algorithms make their decisions is really necessary. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of economic incentive toward that.
I talked to a guy named Kevin Cordy. He coined the term echo Borg. which is they did this weird experiment with kind of showing you that if you put an implant in someone's ear. Now, if I'm talking to you how you're hearing my voice right now, it's a person talking to you. So anything that I say to you, you could be like, oh, I could fact check that, or I can look that up, and he might not probably be right. But if I had a robotic voice, it would sound like it was coming from something that knew more than what a human could know. So you automatically do what it said. And they did this experiment, and it went in a really weird direction where I start kind of looking at life a little bit differently. Like, we're going to advance AI to a point, or we're just going to advance technology to a point where it's going to make our lives a hell of a lot easier, much like it's done today. I'm just hoping we don't cut corners to be able to, I guess, get to that end goal, which is the fact of, I feel like I wouldn't say being like how it was like with the Luddite movement, but in a sense, it's kind of like that. I know a lot of people want machines to take their jobs, and there's a lot of people out there that don't want their job taken by a machine. It's unpredictable, and that's what's fascinating about it, because I think AI created music is amazing. Just the fact that you can type in a random algorithm or something like that, and you can just keep rejecting it and rejecting it. My intro for my show is algorithm music. It's not my own creation. It's something that was created by a machine, which sounds crazy, and it's really good too. But then we get into like where they were talking about Tupac holograms, like at a concert, you can listen to Tupac. I'm like, well, when you sign a contract as an actor, when you sign a contract as a musician, is there going to be like a statement in there that says when you're dead, they can make movies with you still by using a hologram or something like that? Like, that's where it starts to get weird, where I'm hoping that people aren't overlooking these basic functions, because I think we're way past what people normally think with tech. For instance, there was a Robotic Institute that put a life like version of a robot like waking up and like being shocked and awed. I'd played it on the show, and the one in the back kept looking over, like always learning, but every time the camera would pan to the one in the back, it would put its head down like I wasn't watching that other robot learn, basically. And a lot of people started trending with the hashtag on Twitter, Terminator. And I was like, well, this is where it goes, is that, see, they don't show you the lead up to this. They only show you that end goal. And then people are like, wait a minute, we're this far in tech, it's going to take over the world. It's like, well, yeah, that's why there's central studies that focus on AI risk, also existential risk when it comes to like Skynet and all that. I don't know if it's going to end up like that. I'm just hoping we don't make those mistakes. I'm curious to what you've looked at or what you've kind of seen that has kind of blown your mind. And do you think that would head in like a worst possible direction?
First, I want to say if there were a robotic voice in my ear telling me what to do, I would be terrified. I'd be like, "Oh my God, they're here." More likely, what you're going to hear is what sounds like a very human voice. That's totally synthetically generated. I mean, that's where we are now, and we're actually at the point where, it's pretty simple to train I don't know what to call it, like a voice cloning algorithm. So you could train a voice cloning algorithm to sound pretty much like you, and the more time you spent with it, the more samples of your voice you gave it, the more accurate it would be. And so, it's deep fakes. Right. So you could create a deep fake of yourself. So somebody else could create a deep fake of you, or they can create a deep fake of your boss and tell you, hey, call you up and say, hey, we need to move this money to this account. And that's actually happened. I mean, there's currently a lawsuit involved with the transfer of $35 million, which was originated entirely by a deep fake voice. An executive of a company. And so the ability for AI to clone actual humans and also to generate people who don't exist. I mean, there is a website, and I can't remember the name of it now. Google put it up, actually. It's is this a real human.com. And it's a bunch of faces that were generated entirely by an algorithm. Basically taking the facial features of dozens of different people and blending them. And they look real. I mean, they look like people you would see on the street. They look like people whose pictures you'd see on Instagram or LinkedIn. And so you could take one of these artificially generated photos, and you can create an entirely artificial persona online, and then operate through that persona and, to scam people or just to hide your identity or, whatever you want. So AI has the ability to do that. Whether, there's going to be a Skynet, well, the question, I guess, is, how much of this is built into our defense systems? The whole plot of the movie War Games, was about that, basically. The notion that human beings can't respond quickly enough to circumstances as they change. And so we need machines that can do that. And then there becomes the question of, is there a fail-safe mechanism? Are there human beings in the interaction that can flip the off switch? So that's what Skynet is, basically, is the idea that, if the missiles come overhead, is there going to be an automated response, or is there going to be a human being with their finger on the button? And it's the same issue with driverless cars. Right now, we have the technology for a fully automated, what's called a level 5 autonomous car, which is it drives itself. But there will be certainly mistakes. But we have the technology, but we aren't ready for it. And so what we have is a situation where we have level 3 or level 4, where there has to be a human being in the wheel with their hands on the steering wheel. And then if you hold the wheel, then the car can drive itself, or it can drive itself in certain circumstances. Volvo has one that drives at highway speeds. Other folks have one that drives in bumper to bumper traffic. But we still have that human being in the seat. And it's more like a security blanket than anything else, because human beings really can't respond that quickly. And there's not really, to my mind at least, a clear path for the takeover. It's like, okay, the car is driving itself. Oh my God, now you need to take over. Human being, please help me. So, we're at the situation now where the technology is getting good enough so that we're faced with these decisions. At what point do we need a human interaction? And are human interactions preferable to machine interactions?
I get these thoughts in my head that go into the conspiracy route. Like there was that video of a guy who crashed his auto driving Tesla going like 100 miles an hour into like a side of a bridge, and he sped up. He didn't slow down. He was like a popular name figure. Like I don't know if he was someone that, like, I guess he was on watch of the CIA or FBI or something like that. Like I said, it goes into conspiracy rabbit hole territory, but it also goes into medical systems. For instance, Robert Epstein, who wrote a bunch of articles exposing big tech and data corporations. I actually sent him an email, and the reply I got back was, "How dare you send me an email using Gmail? Don't you know that is compromised risk?" Because he does expose a lot of things with Google. And I was like, I didn't even think about it. See, we use it as a reflex. We don't think about how we send, what our email addresses are. He's like giving me all these lists of emails to use that are not run by Google and all these. I'm like, well, how do we know? That's the thing, is that when it starts leaking into like the medical system, for instance, if everything's run by machine, how easy is it going to be to, end somebody's life if you just change, oh, instead of 300 of this, I'm going to give them 300 of this. And then next thing you know, you say, oh, it's machine error. Well, when they first were created, there's a lot of reporting about car accidents and them exploding. It seemed like they were always on the news. They were being targeted, especially Elon was for a short period of time. Now it seems like they're more open to the idea of it. And I look at it like, how is a robot? It's not at that stage yet, but eventually it will be a auto drive car that could predict a drunk driver in front of you. Now, if someone's driving in front of you drunk. Now the robot just sees a car block or a car space in its GPS navigation system. You can tell that this person's drunk. The robot doesn't know what that is. Eventually, it'll evolve to know what that is. But also the reflexes. A robot can move probably faster than a human can when it comes to a car accident, which is a good capability of it. I just hope that we're bringing the positives and the negatives to the table, because this is the most important thing. And like I said, when I'm looking up AI risk or AI research people, the main institutions that are being funded to track big data issues with Google or with all these types of things are run by people who work at these companies. Like one of the major ones for like DeepMind or something like that is a Google head home person in their research department. And I'm like, well, I don't expect you to tell me the truths when it comes to corruption in your own company. Now, they do have a clause that says do no evil, or it's be no evil or something like that, which says we're trying our best to make sure, don't be evil where it comes to just being ethically right. It's like, well, eventually, when are you going to blend what's ethically right with the fact of what's better for your company? And this is the part where we get into, if an AI is getting better data from you and able to advertise better to you and get them more money in their pocket, that's not really evil in the sense of like, at least nobody's dying. It's like, yeah, but that's somebody's privacy rights. And I think with a lot of people now, everyone's seeing the tracking of cookies and data whenever they log into a site. Now, hopefully they say decline all. If you say accept, it's because you're too lazy or the option's too low for your finger to reach. But you start to question, what are they tracking exactly? Like, I use this computer just for podcasts. But if I type in something to pull up on the show, it might be crazy and insane that puts me on a watch list. But I don't ever have to worry about like them monitoring my browsing history. Now, my phone, I remember pulling up I was cracking a joke at how everybody wants free healthcare. And I was like, the reason why we don't have free healthcare is because this. And I put up IHOP's menu, and IHOP's menu is like 4,500 calories per serving or something like that. And not even a minute later, through my, not on my computer, on my phone, I had an IHOP advertisement. I'm like, well, now it's just targeting your internet source. Whoever's logged onto that internet is going to show you ads based on the thing, which now makes it harder if you're Christmas shopping for a loved one. If you're searching up something on Amazon through your internet, then your they're looking for it. They're looking for it. But it's also, you can start to sway opinions and thoughts through censorship and all these other issues that start to become like, I think you're the article I read about military using AI and using that for defense strategies as well, too. I didn't even think about that. And that is probably largely what a lot of it is now, only because it's better than human capabilities when it comes to being able to monitor or clean up a system. But where are the flaws at? And they don't really tell you the flaws. And if they do, they say it's a data breach from like overseas or something like that, which makes you think that their system is not as faulty as they want you to believe, which I start to get again into conspiracy territory where my fear level starts rising up.
Well, I would say first, in terms of like executives or researchers or, data scientists working for Google and big companies, well, they are also human beings, and they often are members of working groups outside of their companies, and they contribute to standards organizations. And in general, I think most of these people have an ethical backbone, and they want to do the right thing. They may not necessarily be able to do it through their job, but there are groups that they do it through. So there are, freestanding organizations that look at AI and ethics and say, okay, here's where we need to be, right? Here are the things we need to do. Here are the goals. Here are the guidelines. Let's all agree on what ethical AI means. So, I think there are people working on that. So it's not just one sort of like, I can't think of the word, homogenous organization. It's very heterogeneous. In terms of the linking between things, one of the things I wanted to talk about with you was a question I've been having for a while, which is, how does Instagram know that I have a cat? Right? Because when I go on Instagram, every third advertisement is for cat toy, and and I'm really tempted because they look really cool. Though I'm afraid to buy one through there, because then I will see nothing but cat toys for the rest of my life. But I went back and I looked at my Instagram feed, which is not very long. I only have like 60 photos. There's one picture of my cat from a year ago. And there's one caption on that picture, or someone's comment says, "Nice cat." And so clearly it's pulling information from other places. Did I search, do I buy cat food at Amazon? I do, right? Did I search for, help because my cat is crazy? I actually went on Nextdoor and say, does anyone know a cat psychiatrist? Right? And so, but it's the mysterious hidden nature of these things that is the problem. It's the lack of transparency about how information is being shared. And you could go into the privacy policies, and God knows I've gone into enough privacy policies. I wrote a book on privacy, and it's like they all are the same, and they don't tell you anything. So everyone's had this experience now of having a conversation. If they have an Alexa device or a Google device in their house, they have a conversation about a topic, and a day or two or a week later, they see ads for something they talked about. And people have asked me, multiple people have asked me, is this listening to me? Is this using, my conversations as fodder for advertisements? And when you talk to the companies, and I have, they fiercely deny they're doing that. And it would be a huge privacy violation if they were eavesdropping on using that information. So nonetheless, I've had the same experience. And so my question is there, surreptitious data gathering going on, or are the algorithms that good? Are they so good that, they can predict I would be interested in a topic that I was talking about last week based on my behavior online? I don't have an answer to that, but it's one of the questions I would like to get answered, because I'm just really curious. It's like, how does this happen on a regular basis?
See, what I do is I post and ghost. I don't really use my social media besides maybe I just started using email to reach out to guests and things of that sort. But when it comes to, I just put one post up and I'm gone. I don't feel the need to constantly be on it. But I had to learn that because I thought I was way more addicted than like, because before that's how you build up a show. That's how you do anything, a business or anything like that. You have to be in the eyes of social media, posting, posting, posting. But I don't do it because it was honestly creating more depression in me than it was anything, just because I felt like I was being addicted to it. But once you cut it off, you realize you're not that addicted to it. But now I do go onto other apps though. Like I'll go onto games on my phone or something of that sort, which I need to also reduce as well too. Um, I think people have the power inside them to kind of get over that hump of addiction when it comes to social media. Now, where do we draw the line at AI, though? I think AI is beneficial when it comes to marketing purposes, but I also don't like it when it's involved in social media. I also don't like it when it's involved in giant like YouTube or anything of that sort. For instance, I had Dr. Pierre Corey on my show. If you know who Pierre Corey is, he's the guy, like main voice of ivermectin, the one who's on Joe
Oh,
Rogan and was
oh,
kind of like showing that. Now, that episode's probably by the time this comes out, it's gone. There's no way. He even told me he's like everything I said is going to violate the policies. They're just using an algorithm though. It's kind of like roamers on the internet. For instance, if you search up Dr. Pierre Corey on the internet, you'll get a couple of his things when he spoke at the Senate and everything like that. But there's none of his like body of work out there, which he has links to on his site. But for Google, they're not going to show you that because it doesn't fit the narrative. Now, this is where it becomes an issue. Dan, imagine if you said something like, I don't know, anything that's against the narrative. They'll put you at the bottom and they'll make you basically invisible. It's like, well, you wrote 2000 something articles. You should be able to find Dan wherever. It's like, no, we've actually kind of hid Dan from everybody out there, which now it hurts your business. It hurts your line of work. It hurts your career. That's where I start having an issue was because in AI, they're just going off of a basic code, like Mark Zuckerberg, the metaverse. I said that 3 years ago. It sounded like dumb. It sounded matrixy. It was like, that's not going to happen. Now it's more normal because we've been kind of shown it and we've been normalized to it, kind of like mass became normalized for a lot of people as well, too. But it's a mini Mark Zuckerberg. It's just every Mark Zuckerberg goes, I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this. And the thing grows upon that. And then now it's like, what happens if that thing, Mark changes his mind and says, oh, actually, I would like this up there. The algorithm is still growing in a direction that he was the old Mark Zuckerberg. So then you look at all the internet problems. YouTube hasn't updated their policy in the past 2.5 years when it comes to the pandemic, things you can and can't talk about. They're just going out of control in a sense where things that the CDC says now, I could say, and it'll still flag me off the internet because before, when they made the conditions and updated them, they have not continued to update them. And that's because they get over 1 million hours of content a minute uploaded to YouTube every single day. And it's like, yeah, I get it. The workload's probably a lot, but now it becomes an issue when you start censoring things because I think that has unintended consequences on the people, mostly depression. Dan, if I just said all your work was eliminated like that, and you have no backups or no proof to show for it, you're going to be pretty depressed. And that's with a lot of people out there as well too when it comes to like their shows or something. You say maybe no, but if you look at a concept of you never existed, you're not even a writer, you're not a journalist, you're not any of those things anymore because they can't find any content to prove to it. It's kind of like Bob Lazar exposing aliens or talking about Area 51 and all that. There's no record of him going to any of these institutions, even though he has pictures of his degrees. He has everything like that. Now, did he forge them online? You don't know because technology is so insane where I start wondering, are we doing more of a hindrance on the growth of human society when it comes to letting things do things for us? And also the fact of our mental capacity, that addiction, that depression that can roll with all these factors that I just listed off is something I don't think people are really paying attention to because they're not in that space yet. You know what I mean? It's kind of like Twitter's really good for connecting with people. But as soon as you say one thing on Twitter that gets suspended, your account gets suspended for a week. Now you're like, okay, well, I can't say that. And then it feels like every time you put up something, you're just not the same. It's kind of like taking something away from you in a sense. And I think that's what happens when you fall outside of the normal line of like, if you end up slipping up and something bans you or something like that, where I go, that's the issue is that it makes you feel I guess, minuscule to the grand scheme of all the work that you've created. If they can just snap you away like a Thanos snap.
the Thanos thing, that would be good. You know, they could implement that. You just get all the rings, get all the stones. I don't think, I think what you're talking about is deplatforming, and or you're talking about content moderation. And honestly, I'm on the opposite side. I think we need more of it.
What?
Because I do, because there's too much disinformation, there's too much misinformation, there's too much propaganda out there. And, most of it is still not being caught. Most of it is still not trapped, especially YouTube. And what happens is the algorithms on YouTube will say, oh, you watch this video, you'll probably like that video. So once you get to one crazy ass video that isn't fact checked and there's no obvious source where you can say, is this true or not, you're going to get another 100 of those videos. And that's what creates these bubbles we're all in. Conversely, even Twitter, I've noticed, and I spend too much time on Twitter, is, someone will say something and, let's say something I don't agree with politically. And I will look at all the comments, and every freaking comment on that post agrees with me. Every single one of them is on my side. And I don't see anyone's opposing side because I'm in that bubble. And so even though there might be a tweet with 5,000 responses to it, I'm not going to see any of the responses that like it because I don't like it. And that's the problem. We're all living in bubbles, right? So, but in terms of, the censorship or deplatforming, I really don't think it's a huge issue. And, if my 2,000 articles disappeared tomorrow, I'd be like, whatever. Honestly,
I would be so lost if that happened. Like, that scares me about content creation. It's like you don't even exist, though. But I mean, when it comes to deplatforming and all that, then why don't they deplatform flat earthers? Why don't they deplatform people that believe in that type of stuff? Like, they leave that up there, but it's like it's weird. Before you couldn't talk about the lab. Now you can talk about the lab. And then now it's like that actually it might have came from someone at the lab. It doesn't mean that they were experimenting. It's like that narrative switch really gets me.
Well, I mean, look at flat Earth, for example. Is it dangerous to believe in a flat Earth? I mean, yes, if you get too close to the edge, you might fall off, right?
Well, they believe in Adolf Hitler. It's linked in.
But, whereas something about a pandemic, which actually has life and death consequences, I want these sources to fact check. I want these sources to at least give me an alternative option. And Twitter started doing that in the last year or so, saying, here are some authoritative sources you might want to check. Or, the thing is, like, you comment on an article and it always says, would you like to read that article first? I mean, they're trying hard to get people to seek out alternative sources of information or seek out opposing views. When it becomes something that has a serious impact on, our health, right?
Yeah.
Or, propaganda about a war that's going on, because, it's a lot of work. It's a huge amount of work to actually say, well, they presented this article. Let me do some research and find out if it's really true. I'm someone who tends to do that because I'm a journalist, but I don't think most people do. So I think those platforms, the huge platforms like Facebook, like YouTube, like Twitter, eventually TikTok, they need to sort of step up and be responsible and say, okay, this person is a nut job, or maybe this person, isn't a nut job, but their point of view is a little odd, and here's some other sources. It's a huge amount of work to do that. They do have teams of thousands of moderators, and it's still not enough. And so they do need algorithms to do that. But I do think that it's their responsibility. I mean, Casey Newton, who's a tech journalist who wrote for The Verge for a long time, now has his own thing. He had a great statement about it. People complained about, their freedom of speech, right? Oh, Twitter is killing my freedom of speech because they remove me from the platform. And it's not freedom of speech they're interested in. It's freedom of reach. They want a platform to distribute their views. And Twitter isn't censoring them because someone at Twitter doesn't like what they're saying. They're censoring them, or they're deplatforming them, or they're warning them because they're violating the terms of service. And that's where it comes down to. It's not flat earthers probably aren't violating the terms of service. That's what you see it.
What about Reuters when like that, they say fact checkers all the time. Fact checkers are checking things. What about Zuckerberg admitting that his fact checkers are opinion-based people? Do you think that doesn't leak in with what Twitter views as like, or Reuters or Reuters, I guess that her name is? Um, Fact checker, like you start realizing it's like these are just like how I explained about the metaverse, where it's a mini Mark Zuckerberg. They're mini whoever that the algorithm has created it. Now, if they're independent people, what happens if that person's like a hard lefty or a hard right person? Then they're just going to be like, well, screw it. I'm going to ban this off because I don't like this narrative if it's from the opposing side. That's where I start having an issue with deplatforming, where I start going, I don't trust the term fact checker because how many times have facts been proven? Oh, we were wrong at first. Let's switch it over. It's like we've seen that with the pandemic as well, too. That's with anything. It's just science. It's evolving. You got to kind of stay up to date and got to keep updating it. I don't think people are super focused on updating what they've already pre-installed. Imagine if you make thousands of code. Imagine having to go back and check every single one of those thousands of code, making sure that they're updated to the proper thing. There's not enough time. You're already creating new things. You're already worried about new money. That's where I'm like a freedom of speech person. But I do agree with you with the freedom of reach. I feel like that's what a lot of people get upset with all these social issues that go on with platforms and stuff like that. But it's weird because I can't help getting that like Illuminati style image out of my head where it's like you got Google, Amazon working together. I don't picture like people in like black cloaks. I picture just a giant corporations that have somehow monopolized the market and have learned to work with the system that they've cookie cut it out for themselves. And I think that's definitely happening. I think we all notice like all gas prices go up at the same time. Like when it comes to all these gas stations that are side by side, supposed to be competitors, their prices raised, one price is raised. Well, wouldn't you want to have yours a cent lower so more people are more swayed to go to your business? But I mean, it's in a sense, it's like unspoken monopolies, which I start getting like kind of, like I said, conspiratorial, but I don't know how much of it is conspiratorial because honestly, if you think that the system isn't fixed for elite class people to be able to work it the way that they want to work it, then I don't know. That just seems like a bold and truth to me, but so many people will deny it, thinking that you're thinking that, I don't know, like your people are sacrificing children or something like that. I'm like, no, I don't picture that. I just picture a bunch of people rubbing their hands through billions of dollars of bills. Like, yeah, we just scam these people out of something.
Well, I mean, in terms of gas prices, it's a cartel, right? So these are different companies that are acting in concert. I know. And so they say, oh, well, you raised your price 22 cents a gallon. I can raise mine. Maybe they'll raise it to 19.5, right? But in terms of technology, technology favors monopolies, right? It favors standardization. So, it is a winner take all kind of thing for whatever reason. So Google dominates search. 65% of all searches happen on Google, or 70. Amazon now dominates e-commerce. Just the way like the Windows operating system dominated with PCs. And, now Android dominates smartphones. And there are the reasons mostly, Android, because it's, essentially free. But technology tends to standardize, right? It's easier to support one kind of software. It's easier to learn the interface for one website than it is, to spread your bets across a bunch of them. So it's sort of an unintended byproduct of using technology is that, how many different, phone interfaces do you really want to learn? One, right? You want to get your stuff done. So in terms of fact checking, I really think, I'm kind of a traditionalist. I've been in this business a while. And so I look for what I consider authoritative and trusted sources, and I think there are several out there. I think Reuters is one. Reuters is a well-trusted news source. AP is one. I do trust the New York Times, the Washington Post. I think, there are, even though they're like the mainstream media or, MSM, I mean, they have reputations. And, when they make mistakes, they admit it. And that's kind of the key, I think, I look for is when, you see a news source that's making outrageous claims and then people say, well, that's false. And here's the proof that it's false. And they don't admit it. They just keep plowing on. I mean, that's how you know that you should no longer pay attention to that news source, right? If they can't admit their mistakes, if they can't correct themselves, And they say, even at some point, they may even fire a reporter for doing a poor job. That's a story. But, it's not like, oh, I'm a fact checker and I have a particular point of view and I'm only going to skew my fact checks toward that point of view. It's not what they do. If they do that, they don't stay in the jobs very long.
Yeah, but imagine if you own the company, though, and you just want that view on your, like if I own a site, for instance, if I own a site like Google or some type of Washington Post or something like that, I'm going to want a bunch of articles that are in fit of the narrative that I do. I mean, it's like a bunch of people at a table. A lot of people want yes men. They don't really want a person who's putting in a different opinion. Now, if you own a Republican website, you're not going to want a Democrat's viewpoint up there. You're just going to want all your same type views. That's what I don't expect is
It's a bubble.
I think people sometimes put in their personal experience a lot into something that I would look at like a money aspect. Sadly, all these news corporations, I don't know who's credible anymore. I mean, there are definitely sources I look at. I'm like, all right, well, that's a well-known thing. Oh, that's a well-known thing. But I've talked to whistleblowers who talk about like all these types of issues that go on, trying to get their information out there as well, too. Then it does come out and you're like, oh my God, they were right. They did expose that type of thing. Next thing you know, they're on national television talking about it. But it's like they talk about how nobody ever gave them a shot to say what they were trying to say. Everyone will be like, okay, whatever, sure, okay. And they walk away. And that's when it starts to become an issue where I start looking at like, you have opinion pieces on a lot of these websites. So if you have opinion pieces on a lot of these websites, then why can't you have these types of information where you can't label like the clear line between medical misinformation or medical disinformation or just misinformation and disinformation. Disinformation means you purposely intended to spread wrongful information. Misinformation means it's wrong, but maybe it was an accidental type thing. They don't really draw the lines clear. Sometimes they just flag things as this. Now, if a person's credible, like an evolutionary biologist, and he's giving his opinion on something like that, and then they say no, it's disinformation, they ban that person from having a platform, like Operation Unity, I think it was called. It was Brett Weinstein was creating a party that was like not Republican or Democrat. It was like a libertarian type thing, but it was Project Unity, having two candidates instead of just one. They banned him off a platform during the Trump election thing because they were afraid that they were going to sway Trump votes, or they were going to sway Biden votes to Trump during that election thing. Like they were that afraid of Trump, a powerful figure like that. Now, I'm not a Trumper at all. I'm not a Biden person either. I would say I'm more libertarian, but I look at it an aspect of like, even if you're going to ban it just not to sway votes, this is where I start looking at like there's perspectives we're not seeing. And that's what I'm interested in, where I start thinking like, this is why I want all opinions in there. If someone's a flat earther, you got to have that guy in there as well too, because I like the out of the box thinking, like someone who's talking about raiding a pizza shop. Do I think that's right? No. But when they're talking about like, do you not think that there's pedophilia going on in the CIA? I mean, William Colby spent 2.5 years of his life exposing that part of the CIA, and he was eventually killed on middle of the night kayak. I'm saying like 2 shots to the back of the head. That's some type of like weird, like they wanted him out. But he exposed real pedophilia in the CIA after he's been involved in it as a director for, I think, well over 12 years. But it was like 2.5 years towards the end he spent exposing that. Now, that's important stuff out there. I'm trying to get someone to talk about that story more because I've heard it so many times. It's William Colby. You can look him up. That's a real person that like exposed something horrible. Now, that could have been labeled a conspiracy thing, but I think with Epstein coming out, how many people called that a conspiracy? Next thing you know, there was an island, there was all this stuff. And that's where you start to have questions. And this is where we get to in history now, where people go, oh, they definitely killed them. Oh, they did this. It's like, well, they've tried to hide it so many times. They've tried to, the trust is gone, where now you have questions like, why are they still not releasing documents about JFK or 9/11? It's like, to put these all to bed, you have to come clean. You have to be honest. And in a world where they're silencing, people don't know if that's silenced the narrative because it's a conspiracy talk. It's like, you got to leave it all up there. We end up being where we're at now, where a lot of people are just like, I don't know. Enough time goes by, people stop caring. There's always something new popping up. I mean, people call me a conspiracy person. I don't really consider that. I just don't if I have a thought in my head about making money and not caring about another person, then I'm guaranteed you they've had the same thought.
Well, I would say that, what you're describing is kind of a unintended negative byproduct of the internet, which is there's too much information, and it's harder and harder to tell what information is valid and what information isn't. And at the same time, as you said, there's definitely people who want to suppress information from coming out. So it becomes harder and harder to learn, who to trust or what to trust. And that's, and especially if you, are on social media a lot and there's this bubble. I mean, there are ways around it. Certainly you could use like DuckDuckGo for searching.
Well, they're gone now.
DuckDuckGo isn't gone. Is it gone?
Look up DuckDuckGo on the internet. I saw you looking up before. Were you looking up William Colby?
Yeah.
Did you find him though? Isn't that fascinating?
I did see a bunch of stories on it. I'm going to read it after we get out. I'm looking at DuckDuckGo right now.
I'm about to say, if you type in DuckDuckGo gone, it was trending on Twitter, I think 2 days ago. People are like, the DuckDuckGo caved into the narrative or something like that.
No, it's right there.
It might have been clickbait.
It probably was. Current problems and outages. I mean, anyway, I don't want to search the web while we're talking, but there are ways you can do it. I mean, you can go in incognito mode. You can, but you have to really work hard. You have to work hard in order to maintain that kind of, neutral presence on the internet that doesn't automatically cater to your interests. And, honestly, it's like at some point you go, I'm just so tired. I just want to look something up. I just want to buy something on Amazon. I just, what the real problem we have in this country, I think, you talk about, being addicted to social media or addicted to technology. We're addicted to convenience. And that's the thing. And that's what these companies are trying to do. It's more convenient to just go on Google and look things up. It's more convenient to just order something on Amazon and have it show up at your doorstep 2 days later. I mean, as opposed to driving to a store and using your gas and your time, do that. You just, click, 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 and you're done. It shows up, right? And so we are, the internet has made things extremely convenient, and we're a bit addicted to it, and that can be a problem.
I imagine something I said in this podcast so far online, if I was posted on Twitter, written in a written format, you would look at it and be like, oh, what the hell is this guy even talking about? But since you're talking to me, you can see I'm not like this person trying to sow seeds of doubt. I'm just literally generally curious. And that's the human connection that I like. I just wonder, that's a lot of our problems with social media. Social media, sadly, we're reading things that people are saying rather than hearing them say it or seeing a face attached with it and that emotion being gone. See, I don't think algorithms are bad. I just think they're unintended consequences. And I also think sometimes someone tries to stick their hand in the cookie jar when it's not time for them to have a cookie. And I think that's a lot.
That would be me.
Well, that's just people in general who create these giant companies and everything like that sort. They don't want anything not making them money. The thing is about like once you start making $5 a day and that bumps up to 50, then it's 500, then it's 5,000, then it's 50,000. You start getting a little bit like, I don't want anything to destroy my line of business because now your spending goes up. Once your spending goes up with the more money that you have, you got to make sure you keep that nut every single time. And that's where I start looking at it from a more like, this is how businesses run. And I think once you understand that businesses kind of translate to all aspects of our really lives in a sense, when it comes to the internet, you got to keep that in mind. I think people think it's like one person that's like, I don't want this. It's like, it's not just one person. It's a bunch of other factors that are underlying in there. And they don't see it from your angle. That's the thing, is like trying to understand it through a conversation or through an open platform or something like that. It's like, there's an app called Truth Social. It came out a month ago. I've been on a wait list on 153,627 for the past, since the day it came out, which was like a month and a half ago or something like that. I think it was just a bunk app, but it's that aspect. People want to know the truth, whether it's someone's opinion, whether it's whatever, it's all these types of things. Now, I don't like narratives being blocked, and I get it for harmful intent. I don't want a kid seeing that you can drink bleach or anything like that. But at the same time, I hopefully that they've been instilled with enough evidence or instilled with enough knowledge to be able to decipher out that information for themselves. A lot of times now, I don't really see a whole lot of action out of people. I just see a lot of laziness or bitching about something. So I'm like, I don't expect people to go full through with it because usually their attention span's so shot. You see one TikTok video of a guy cutting open a light bulb, you're on to the next TikTok video. Like it's that quick. People go, well, that's a good idea. And they go, wait a minute, you can cut an air freshener bottle open and you get a little ball at the bottom of it. I don't know what those are, but I also think that people are now becoming a little bit more lazy, where I think that you have to understand, like, you can regulate it as much as you want, but I don't want to get people to get so lazy that they don't understand that some of the regulation is steering them in a certain direction. And that's where we also land with advertisements and marketing. We're being marketed to 24/7, whether that's articles you like or articles you don't, or whether that's just an Amazon website. That hurts the small business person who's trying to get their content out there. Now, if I type in Dan Tynan on the internet, I'll get your website. But imagine if you don't fit in Google's narrative and they just choose to put you on the 100th list of Dan Tynan, whatever. If it's not a unique name like that, if it's like maybe a name where they're like out of the blank, for instance, there's out of the blue, there's all this type of stuff, but those came after me. But it depends. Sometimes Google will show you the newest ones that are up. So then there you go. That's how your search result gets hit. And then you get into this weird area of like, are you limited on who you want to become? And is it your fault? And I think a lot of people can't decipher that it might not necessarily be their fault, and they take it like they're not worth anything. And that's when it becomes an issue as well, too. See, I'm trying to analyze this from a mental aspect of people. And I know people are more than willing to push the blame onto somebody else, but also when it is directed towards them, they don't take it as like, just brush it off. They take it as, I got to end my life. And that's a fucking horrible thing. But people do that. And I think that's a factor of the world today. Like, we're not communicating anymore. There's not a lot of empathy. There's a lot more people online telling you to go kill yourself than telling you to have a great day. Like, maybe that's my algorithm that's showing me more people saying that type of stuff. But there's a large amount of just people that will fight at the first bad thing or something they don't agree with, rather than communicating effectively to be able to understand the person's viewpoint.
I think you need to watch more puppy videos. If you watch more puppy videos, you'd have more people tell you to have a good day. I think you make a valid point about, people are out there seeking validation online more and more, and especially kids, right? Especially, young girls on Instagram and young girls on TikTok. And so, they're living for the likes. They're living for, all of that. And I have to wonder what happens when that goes away, because, everyone can't be a supermodel. Everyone can't be an influencer. Everyone can't be, a TikTok star. So, 99.9% won't be any of those things. So what happens then? I mean, if they're living their lives for this external validation from strangers, what do they do when they're 25 or 30 and they don't have that option anymore? So I'm curious about that. I'm going to go back to one thing you said, though, with Truth Social. You understand the background of Truth Social, right? Where it came from?
No. Trump.
It's Trump. It's Trump.
God damn it. Well, Getter, they said Getter was that too, but then I see a lot of people on Getter as well too.
No, Trump actually has an ownership stake in Truth Social. He is getting financing from a SPAC, a sort of reverse stock deal for $1 billion. A lot of the financing is coming from China, and it's all about, it's about amplifying and elevating Trump and his followers. Well, and that's it. You
said China, so I have to delete the app now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the key investors in that SPAC is a Chinese firm. I can't remember who. I think it's a VC firm.
That's why I didn't download TikTok, because the CCP originally was taking data from it. So I was like, I didn't want them tracking my stuff. I'm not a big fan of the CCP. I hate them.
I would agree. That's probably good. I would have to be on your side on that one for sure. ByteDance, I think, is the name of the company. But yes. So you have to, that brings up another issue. You have to sort of look at who's behind this app, right? What are their motivations? What do they want you to do? And Truth Social is great branding, right? But they're not interested in truth. They're interested in a particular point of view. And there already have been people who've been banned from the platform. So
what's your measure when you go to a website to verify if it's authentic or not? Usually I scroll down to the bottom and see what ads they're displaying. Usually if they're displaying an ad like Trump this or Biden that, I'm like, well, there's your side right there. Like, you're not probably going to tell me anything that doesn't agree with that narrative. I try and find like things that'll give me like an ad for like an apple cream or something like that, where it's like, you're just selling me some herbal medicine. I'm not really afraid of you, having a political side, because it seems like, I don't know, you're just selling me a herbal cream. There's not any threat I would sense there. But if I see something like I don't know when the narrative became that you can like conspiracy has linked into like right wing, like hard right winger. And I'm like, where what is that? Like people, I know people that are not right at all and they get called that. It's like, for what? It's like, because you said that you're not going to get a Pfizer shot. It's like, what the fuck does that label you as? But it's the weird hijacking of terms. Like science doesn't even really mean science anymore because everyone goes trust the science. I'm like, that was a post about you finding a fortune cookie and it giving you some enlightenment. Like that's not trust the science. Stop using that term. It's the words are starting to be beaten and broken and pushed into a way where it's like somehow like left, right, all these types of things, they're insults and they're how people identify as well too. Sometimes people will introduce themselves as their political party before they introduce their name. It's like that's where I see the words starting to translate into aspects of our lives that are going to degrade us in the long run.
Well, that's where polarization comes in, and that's where we are now. And then, unfortunately, again, the algorithms we're talking about, bubbles that it creates, just reinforces the polarization, right? You are at one side, it pushes everyone away from the middle and toward the ends. I would say in terms of evaluating websites, you can't just go by the ads because most websites, especially smaller websites, they immediately sign up for Google ads. And they don't have control over what ads show up on their site. Google say, oh, this is political content, I'm going to run a political ad, right? And they can, go into their Google settings and say, I don't want these particular kinds of ads, but most people won't because they want the ads, right? Because, you don't really generally make money on a website. It's hard. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of promotional work, as you know, right? And, to get your Google juice up there so that people can find you. And so, it doesn't necessarily reflect the point of view of the website. If you want to see if a website is legit, what I usually do is I say, well, are there real people behind it? Do I know who these people are? Do they use their real names? Are they using a real address? And that's the first thing is, are they putting their own personal reputations out there? And a lot of them aren't. And a lot of them use fake profiles, fake names. I wrote a piece for The Guardian in 2016, right before, it's the whole thing about Facebook blew up about promoting, basically fake news sites. So I wrote a story about fake news sites. And one of the things I discovered was that, they're using pseudonyms. And, it's like one guy, one person who's writing under 6 different names, none of them his own. And they're just regurgitating stuff they found in other websites. And so, you want to look at things like, okay, are there real people behind it? Are they putting their names behind it? Can you contact them? Right? Is there a phone number maybe, or are they just a PO box? And then are all these stories the same? And are all these stories just copies of other people's stories? Is there any original reporting? Is there original point of view? And so it takes a little work. And so it's much easier to say, oh, see a headline and respond and react than it is to go in and do the research. And that, unfortunately, is the problem.
That's why on my show, I like it. Like, yeah, there's video, but also at the same time, you have to use your real name. Because if it's what you actually believe, like I know a lot of people do stuff for comedic effects. I've been at fault of that myself as well too. But I feel like when they come on and they actually speak, like my buddy who's a flat earther, he'll rant about how the earth is flat. And I'm just sitting there like, Jesus Christ. Like I've had astrophysicists tell him that no, it's not, and all this type of stuff. But he 100% believes it. So I'm not going to dismiss his perspective. I've gotten crap for the people I've had on my show before. And I go, look, man, if that's their viewpoint, that's their experience through life, then you can't really shame them for that. Now, people are more than happy to have their own opinions about stuff, but they lump me in with that as well too. I get called a conspiracy person if I have someone that believes in whatever or that doesn't fit whatever the narrative is. I'm just open to having a conversation to hear someone else's perspective out, because I don't think that we're all supposed to be fighting this easy. I think we should have more of a conversation when it comes to a lot of aspects of life, because you need to see that other person's perspective. If you tell me right now the earth is flat, I'm going to sit there and go, tell me, why is it? And then I'll have you explain it. I'm never going to tell you that, no, you're not right. I'm just going to be like, I mean, that's a good point. That's a good point, because I'm hearing you out and people go, well, that incentivizes the misinformation. I'm like, it really doesn't, though, because at no point am I going to walk out into my life and start spreading that the earth is flat. I'm just going to listen to this person and give them the respect that they deserve, because a lot of these people go into these conspiracy narratives because they don't feel validated in life. Most people don't feel validated in life. They go to social media, but a lot of these people stick with these narratives because nobody ever gave them the time. They shut them out and called them an idiot or something like that. So if you talk to more people with an open mind, you get this type of sense of like, even when I have skeptics on the show, like Michael Shermer or Brian Dunning or something like that, I'll talk to them and I'll like ramp it up a little bit. And they'll be like, no, it's because of this and it's because of this. And I'm like, yeah, but like you get like their whole workup to it, right? Like that's all about understanding that whole why someone got there. And then you can kind of, when you put yourself in their mindset, you see that. That's why, like, when I look at these big tech corporations, I don't look at them like this person's the devil incarnate. I'm like, no, they're a person that are making money and they're not paying attention to a lot of the things that they established. You gotta maintenance that shit. And sadly, you're asking them to maintenance when they be more than happy to just sit in a hot tub all day and drink champagne. I would do that too. If I created Google and I had to worry about regulating it every day, I'm just going to toss it out to a bunch of robots to do it for me. So I don't have to keep checking it it's like checking your email. Refresh that shit every day, once a day, twice a day. Some people do it 24/7. That becomes a problem because what minutes of your life are you wasting refreshing your email when you could be out doing whatever? But a lot of people consider, well, this is a great way to pass the time. I'm like, nah, not for me. So you got to understand that perspective when it comes to just understanding the mindset of the person who is probably creating that and working with it. And the best way you can get through that is by talking to somebody.
Well, I would, if I were sitting in a hot tub drinking champagne 24/7, I would want a robot to bring me more champagne.
That would
So it would be nice, wouldn't it? I am really curious about your friend who believes in the flat earth. I mean,
he's an ex-Power Ranger, so it's even better.
I mean, where do you start that conversation? I mean, it's like, what does he think the moon landing was faked? I mean, does he think the pictures of the globe are faked? I mean, what does he think?
See, I'm in the boat of probably the moon landing might be a little bit of a hoax.
Really?
Well, I kind of joke around with it, but my whole thing was, imagine that your morale is low as a country because you're in a giant space race and it seems like you're losing. The best thing that you would do would be to falsify a video and then have it like that and then get there later. You still got there. It's just, it wasn't exactly when you said it. You just wanted to boost up morale. That's where I can understand it. But at the same time, I'm like, if someone tells me, no, that's not true, I'm like, yep, that's fine. I'm like, might be, might not be. I don't really care that much. I'm not that invested. I'm more invested into like the data corporation stealing all my shit somehow or creating a clone of me. Like I get worried about that. But then I look at like the flat earth. The biggest point that they bring up is that NASA CGI'd clouds on the first actual pano pictures of the earth. They added them to make it look more beauty for the public. And they go, well, if they falsified this part of the photo, then they're probably lying about other stuff as well, too. And that's where you start to be like, okay, now you just have trust issues. Like it all boils down to trust eventually. Like remember during the pandemic, they said, don't get the N95 mask. And they were giving some excuse. And then they came out later saying, oh, it was to make sure more healthcare workers got it. Well, that's the trust. Now the trust is gone. Now people wonder, hey, what should I question you on now? And that's where we have this whole entire mixed mass of like people not knowing where the hell to go and who to trust and who to believe in, Fauci, whatever. You got to look at it like if I gave you $1 million in one hand and a pile of shit in the other, you have to expect that you're going to get both. So you have to be willing to accept the pile of shit. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that. A lot of people just want to brag about the things that they have and not about the bad part that comes with it. I mean, that's what social media is. You see someone's vacation trip to Tahiti. You see all the beneficial pictures, not about the flat tire, not about maybe the loan they had to take out to go there and do that trip, or not about how they had to bust their ass 24/7 to afford that one weekend there. I feel like if we're more transparent in that aspect of social media and just the internet in general, with anything, even in your own life, you probably would have a lot more people looking at you like, okay, I can relate to this person because now I just don't see all the good stuff. I see the bad stuff, which I also experience.
Right. It's sort of transparency. I have to correct you, though. The first pictures of the Earth that were taken from space were about 1970, way before CGI was invented.
First pano pictures.
Pano. What is panoramic?
Panoramic. The full scale thing. You can look that one up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's they added clouds to the thing. It's the whole narrative that drives down the flat earth topic. But then it leaks into weird, like dark stuff where they start talking about like there's a base in the Arctic and it's linked in with Adolf Hitler. In your free time, I played it on the show in my first episode. It's like my first episode, 1001, when I came back, was a flat earth convention. There are people wearing like Abraham Lincoln hats, and they're like, flat earth, top of the hat. It's flat, like the top of the hat. And he's just like, you could tell there's something missing in his mind. But the whole narrative that they drive home, it's like, oh, you start to see how they've gotten their way to that point where they're just building up the information. It's like if I showed you nothing but cat videos and then you've never experienced what another animal is like, you would only think that this is what all animals are. You wouldn't think there'd be dogs and other things because you've never seen a dog. It's like if I tell you Bigfoot, you know, Bigfoot's a folklore beast or crypto or whatever thing. But imagine if they found out Bigfoot was real. You'd be like, what the hell? Like everything I heard was it was a legend and story and all this type of stuff. It's like, well, now you see why the paranormal Bigfoot hunters go after that.
It's a really big cat is what it is. Bigfoot is an enormous cat.
That walks on two legs?
Walks on two legs. It's a very advanced cat.
But see, this is where I, especially, you know, as a journalist or something like that, being able to like kind of like look through all forms of evidence, and then that becomes an issue when you realize how much of the evidence is actually given to you and how much of it has been taken off. Like William Colby, for instance, that's documents that were released by the CIA, declassified later, but they weren't giving them out in the beginning because it was private. And then you realize, okay, I understand it for like government security and all that, but when you're creating a book, you know how many books about William Colby were created before the exposure of like his death and the pedophilia thing that was going on? A lot. So that's a missing piece for a lot of those people who established a narrative or something like that in the beginning.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's lots of stories, especially about the CIA and you know, about them dealing drugs, running drugs, you know, murdering people, and then they come out. It turns out, you know, they start out as rumors. Turns out they're true, right? And so, yeah, I think there's a lot more to be learned. I think recently, I'm trying to remember the names of the different projects, but there've been a few massive journalism projects that reveal the extent of hidden bank accounts and, you know, secret corporations and LLCs that are, you know, just hiding money for billionaires and, you know, folks like Vladimir Putin.
Is that the Panama Papers thing that came
There's
out?
the Panama Papers. There's another one too.
Paradise Papers.
Yes, all of those. And so, and that was just, you know, hundreds of journalists around the world working for years to uncover this stuff. They were able to do it, but you know, it takes that kind of effort in order to expose this stuff. And even then, we're still left with, well, you know, there's that LLC. Who does it really belong to? And you know, we need more transparency. We absolutely need more transparency in terms of corporate ownership, and we need more transparency in terms of the activities of our government agencies. You know, the Freedom of Information Act was created in the early 70s after, you know, the revelations of the Pentagon Papers and Watergate came out. And so Congress passed a law that says, okay, you know, if you really want to find out, you know, for example, what's in your FBI file, you now have the right to do that. And you can send them a request and they're required to respond. And that was a law that was passed after we found out how much lying was going on in terms of the US government to the American people. And so we need more of that. And that's one of the good things about the internet is you can crowdsource that kind of thing. And, you know, so on a positive aspect, you can have a lot of people digging and they come up with new stuff. And all of a sudden, people in power have to respond. So that's one of the positive aspects. The negative aspects is, you know, all the misinformation that's out there or the bad journalistic work that's being done, you know, and then the conspiracy theories that arise as a result.
Have you ever thought about switching gears when it comes to what you write about? Have you ever thought about taking a more serious, like, I feel like you could open up the political system to a point where it's like breaking a crocodile's mouth open, just snapping its, you know, like King Kong in the movie where he grabs the T-Rex and rips its jaws open?
That's totally me. I would look for reptiles that I could dismember. You know, I actually started a political blog 15 years ago. The problem with those things is, you know, they take time to build, as you know, with your show, right? You know, and it was consuming a lot of my time, and got a little tired of playing to an empty room. But yeah, I have a strong political bent. It is not often reflected in my journalistic work because I am mostly writing about technology and not about politics. But my Twitter account, on the other hand, I often wonder. I mean, I get pretty direct and often angry on Twitter, and I often wonder if people see that and go, "Tynan is losing it. He's just completely nuts."
I had a feeling because I was talking about some things and I saw your face like pull like you wanted to say something. I was like, I'm definitely hitting something.
Yeah, well, yes.
I don't mean to. I'm just ranting.
No. You're not pissing me off or anything. I'm making a mental note saying, okay, he said that, and I want to say this to that. When it's my turn to talk. So that's what you're seeing. Basically, me saying
I'm not a bad guy. I'm trying my hardest to decipher because I'm out here. I've talked to so many people and it's like you hear so much information, then you see so much information. It's like I'm literally just generally curious in a lot of shit. And I think that's probably what gets me in trouble most of the time.
I think it's great to be curious about a lot of shit. I mean, I'm sort of the same way. I mean, it's like I find things that are interesting and I will go down that rabbit hole for a while. And I think it's great, that you have this open forum where you can say, okay, sure, talk about the flat earth, convince me the earth is flat. I think that's great. I think we need more of that, actually, but what we also need is someone who can push back and say, well, you said that, but this source says this. What do you say? I mean, I know Joe Rogan got into trouble recently because, he's been giving a platform to people who are, maybe saying things that aren't true. And it's not that's not the problem. The problem is not pushing back. The problem is not asking the right questions to follow up. And, your friend who says, well, the earth is flat. And I said, well, what about this? What about this? How about, this evidence here? And, have you ever been in an airplane? Have you flown from the US to Europe? Did you see any crust on the edge? It's like, so that's what's missing in a lot of these dialogues, especially with platforms that are very oriented towards one political orientation or another, like left or right. They tend not to ask the hard questions. And I think that's what we need. We need people who will, absolutely, I will give you a platform. You can say whatever crazy shit you want to say, but I'm going to ask you some difficult questions to see if you can answer.
I've done that pushback a couple times, even with my flat earth buddy, mostly when I got to know him a lot better. It's like, you don't do that on someone's first episode, but once you start to develop a relationship, there was a lot more of me like, I don't think so. But then it was like a 3-hour episode where my mouth was just dropped and I was just sitting there like, what the fuck is happening? But I mean, it's hard because when you meet a person for the first time, you can't have that level of like comfortability in some aspects of things. Joe Rogan, when he originally started, like the first 600, he was pushing back on a lot of people. Brian Dunning was one of the people he got that actually the video is not available to watch. You can look it up on the internet, but it's not on YouTube. It's not only that because they got into an article because he wrote an article about Joe Rogan. And then when I had Brian on my show, I could sense there was moments he wanted to push back, but he also matured from that Joe Rogan episode, like got older and kind of realized you can't just go outright and scream like that. And a lot of like what journalism is, for instance, you can write an article about someone like this is the worst president or this is whatever. But imagine talking to that person. That person's going to be ramped up to 10 and you might be at a level 1. So you got to look at it from that aspect as well, too. I just think, especially when it comes to asking the hard questions. I've done that a few times when it comes to like someone telling me it's a past episode, but someone telling me like doctors' ethical choices doesn't matter if it's religion or not, how tough the call's got to make. They're going to stand their ground. I go, not true. In one aspect, when someone brings up the topic of gender and he goes, okay, you might be right about that. I was like, that's the thing is like everyone has like their stuff where they know a lot of information. They don't know a lot of information. It's not necessarily about arguing or debating, but it's also about raising a question as well, too. And you can't get upset if you don't have the answer to that question. Like there's a bunch of stuff like you can bring up to me and I'll be like, I don't know. I'll be 100% transparent with the information that I do know. Because in the long run, I'm like, I'd rather have a deeper conversation with you about being honest or just being in this moment and having a general chit chat than sitting there and just being like, oh, yeah, then making up a story or something like that. Like there's not really a whole lot of time for that. I mean, I get it. People like stories, people like entertainment. But when it comes to like experiences I've heard, I'm going to ask questions like, whoa, so you say your grandma was talking to you from beyond the dead? And, they might be like, yeah, tell me a whole story. I'm like, what about if it was like the wind or something? They're like, no, it was 100% this. I'm like, okay, well, I raised the point. At least it got someone out there who's listening to think about it. But all right.
Yeah, it's a difficult balance, and I think it helps if you have this conversation like we're having, where you can see someone's facial reactions, and you're talking human, and you become more empathetic, right? And there are ways of doing it. You don't have to be. I mean, you're probably too young to remember Mike Wallace, who was a hard charging reporter for 60 Minutes, and his rep was he was going to go in and he was going to confront you, and he was going to run up to you as you're trying to enter your house and with a microphone and the camera, and he was very confrontational journalism. And it makes for good TV, but it doesn't make for good journalism necessarily. And it's funny because his son is Chris Wallace, who has just left Fox News, and Chris Wallace isn't like that at all. He actually was one of the very few people on Fox News who would ask difficult questions of conservative political figures, but he did it in a very gentle way. Right. And so he did it in a safe place for them. They didn't always respond very well because they didn't expect a hard question from someone on Fox News. But, it's that kind of attitude. It's like, okay, be polite but persistent. Right. Be respectful, but also don't be afraid to confront someone when you think they're full of shit. So, I mean, it's not something you see as much these days because, again, polarization, right? People who are on one side of the political equation want to speak with other people who are on the same side, and it's true in both right and left, right? So have that sort of conversation in the middle where you can have a respectful conversation, respectfully disagree, each express your points of view, and walk away without being pissed off. That's what we're missing.
I agree. I mean, I'm gracious that you gave me the time to be able to chat. I mean, that's for a lot of people, like even an hour, it's not exactly doable for a lot of people, whether you got free time or not. It's just about being interested in the thing. And, you gave me the time to be able to have a conversation. I appreciate it a lot, Dan. Is there a place where people can find you, links wise, besides your website?
That's pretty much it. I mean, dantynan.com is my website.
Twitter.
Follow me on Twitter, which is Tynan Writes. And those are two, and then LinkedIn, which is like the world's most boring website. But, and that's pretty much where I live, those three places. And then you Google me, you'll find me, and you'll find the guy who raises sheep in Ireland. And he's really good. He's a very good, I got to say, he and I are neck and neck in the Google search for Dan Tynan. So, but it's mostly me.
Well, I'll link it all in the description. Is there anything you want to say to anybody out there listening before we wrap up the show?
I would say, hey,
don't do
follow
drugs.
out. Don't do do the right drugs and in the right amounts. You got to balance it.
That's great. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.